this is our, basically the hostility panel.
Yes, well,
So what are you assholes doing here?
okay. Oh, welcome to our panel. The original topic of this was fighting back against big tech, but
And several other things.
we've compressed and expanded a little bit, so we will be talking about how to exist and thrive in an environment where there is an orthodoxy that is generally hostile to creativity and someone who wants to express a non-approved opinion. So if we can just start at the end there and introduce ourselves and maybe talk a little bit about what orthodoxies you have had to confront and where.
I'm Russell Newquist again. So I made the mistake, I guess, of telling Rob a few weeks ago that I'd sit on any panel he wanted me to, which is why I've been on so many. But this is the only one I actually volunteered for. I was not supposed to be on this one, but I heard about it, and I'm like, oh no, I have some stuff to add. So you've heard the name John Del Rose mentioned a few times in vain in this con. We did publish some works by him, and we had one of them shut down by Amazon, and we had to go fight back against that, and I'll tell that story as we get into the panel. And we've also done some other things that we're working on to try and kind of break out of the Amazon ecosystem, so fighting back against big tech.
So I'm Rachel Fulton Brown. I'm professor at the associate professor at the University of Chicago. Therefore, I'm representing academia. I made the career challenging choice to, on the one hand, champion Milo Yiannopoulos for his bold speech in the context of standing up for academic freedom, which was a bit of a surprise to me that, in fact, standing up for academic freedom is no longer an academic value. We can talk about more.
I'm J. Daniel Sawyer. I grew up in the religious right and having to deal with a lot of behind-the-scenes scandals that I had to push back against. When I moved into the secular world, I've encountered a serialization of orthodoxies that I've just found myself hitting back against. I'm basically reactive by temperament. I don't like authoritarianism no matter what package it comes in. And it doesn't matter the doctrine, the mentality is the same.
I'm Dan Gaynor. Like Russell, I volunteered for this panel because this is my day job. I'm Vice President for Free Speech America for the Media Research Center. We run a website called censortrack.org that actually is a database collection of people get censored. We work with big tech. We fight big tech. I've been on meetings with top people at different companies. This is something I do 7 days a week. Been doing it for several years. If any of you get censored, believe me, reach out to me. I'll probably be bashing all the big tech companies here, but at the same time, I know we got to work with them. I've got a short story collection on Amazon. Please buy it. It hasn't been censored yet, but give it time.
My name is Hans Schantz. By career and profession, I am a scientist. I've discovered the nature of the science hierarchy is such that it tends to reinforce groupthink and discourage originality in research, and I've had to develop ways to get around that and to fund and share my ideas. As part of expressing myself and my ideas, I have gotten into science fiction writing and into collaborating with other science fiction authors. I have been involved in arbitration campaigns with companies like Indiegogo and with Patreon, and have acquired some experience in how you can use the legal system and arbitration systems to remedy situations and apply pressure on big tech.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. And we'll start with a few questions that I just kind of like to throw open for anybody here who wants to tackle them. It's clear to everyone who's here that we're definitely facing a certain hostility on behalf of a certain orthodoxy, but in order to resist that, I think we first have to understand where it comes from. So, does anyone want to comment on what we think is the origin and nature of this kind of hostility to independent thought?
Go ahead. I'll take this one because this this is something I've been wanting to get off my chest, and this is a good
And I
opportunity.
want to jump
for
in
it.
afterwards.
Yeah, I think we all want a piece of it.
So, yeah, going back several years, and probably going back as far as Gamergate, there have been a group of people who just wanted to do their own thing, just want to play video games, just want to write and read good adventure tales, and have suffered the slings and arrows of hostile social justice warriors wanting to shut them up and shut them down. And in fighting back, there's been a movement within our tribe of, just leave us alone, we just want to write stories. And the other side just doesn't like us having our fun and doing our thing. And we're not going to write message fiction, we're just going to write good, heroic, old-fashioned stories that speak to traditional values. And what I think some people fail to understand is those heroic adventure stories are message fiction. They are conveying a message like reality exists whether you look at it or not. They're conveying a message that actions have causes and they have consequences, that people have free will, that they can make choices. If those choices are good, they'll tend to get good actions. If you make poor choices, there can be consequences for those choices. People aren't helpless automatons being buffeted by the winds of fate and subject to oppressive power structures. The SJWs recognize that it's their message fiction against our message fiction. And instead of just wishing we get left alone and trying not to get beat up upon and do our own thing, we need to recognize that there is a conflict. We need to recognize why that conflict is there, that there is an opposition of values. And not everyone is suited to go into the fray, but when people are, we need to do our best to back the people on our side who are willing to put up a fight, who will fight back, and who are helping to develop some of the parallel alternative avenues and platforms by which we can share and spread our ideas.
It's not just message fiction, it's everything. If you have to realize this fight's been going on for decades. My organization's been fighting with the traditional media for 34 years. But you're right, I think that Gamergate was sort of the breakthrough where the left really started to want to cancel people. If you look on social media, up to that point, Twitter, Facebook, everything was still pretty tolerant of other opinions. That's when it all went away. And, what you have to understand now is it's not a free speech battle anymore. That's all out the window. It is now, can you exist online, or are you a third-class citizen? It is banking. It is payment services. It is, can you live in your freaking apartment? People in Florida right now being evicted if they don't have the vaccine. It is digital tracking of your financial records. It is every aspect of your life. Because if they control the digital you, they can control you. And that's the battle. So it's this whole idea of free speech, as much as we all believe in it, that's not the fight anymore. It is now simply a battle for freedom.
This goes back a lot farther than either of those things. This goes back to the Reformation and the dissolution of the Catholic Church. Out of the ferment, so the thing is,
I agree.
I like the progression.
the Catholic,
You're setting it up for Rachel very well.
My apologies to inerrantists in the room. The Catholic Church was able to hold civilization together because it was able to assert that the problems in the Bible don't matter because the Pope speaks ex cathedra and the Bible is a product of the Church, not the direct Word of God. Once the papal authority was disintermediated, the individual believers, parishes, and sects had to cope with the problems in the Bible by themselves, and everyone came up with a different idea. And as the Enlightenment progressed, and science showed more and more holes in the natural history side of the Bible, the soteriology got called into question, and out of that came liberal Protestantism in the 19th century as a desperate, heroic effort to rescue Christianity from the jaws of modernity. And part of that project was to relocate the kingdom of God from heaven to earth by importing Hegel and some other stuff as an achievable, perfectible paradise on earth. If only we can use popular consent and the muscle of the state to purge society of sin, we can bring about the kingdom of God on earth and induce the second coming of Jesus Christ. The prohibition movement comes out of this. The anti-slavery movement comes out of this. The Nazi Party comes out of this. American progressivism, which reinstated segregation at the federal level, comes out of this. The nature and details of this gospel have changed. It's become less explicitly Christian and more explicitly secular. But this is a fight with, weirdly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, fundamentalists, atheists, and free thinkers on one side, and liberal Christians and their descendants on the other side. Because the former does not, what we share in common is we do not believe that humanity is perfectible, and we have to play the ball where it lies. And the latter believes that we can find the exact right formula to solve all our problems, so virtue becomes a social quality and a national quality rather than an individual quality.
So, utopians versus those who are just trying to make their bridge hold together with chewing gum and baling
Right,
wire.
and the second fight, and once this fight is over, the next fight will be between the secularists and the fundamentalists. Because then it'll be about how we parse things out and make things work, and how much of religion is in the public sphere and in what sense.
Okay.
But until that day, we're on the same side.
Okay, so I'd like to give Rachel a chance to weigh in on this, but please without going too heavily into the history of the church, because we
It's
are
not
originally
possible.
planning to talk
Okay.
about big tech here.
No, we're not. Satan. Who is the original rebel? You know, we play Solinsky and stuff like that. But I mean, the battle is between those who make and those who are jealous of the makers, right? And that's the satanic impulse is, I want to be in charge of that thing that you made. And that's in the mythology, it's what Satan says to God, and in Tolkien's version, it's what Morgoth does, or Melkor does in the midst of the music. I mean, God's still in charge, so we can talk about that. But what we're fighting against, and I think both Hans and I don't know your name yet, Dan, are saying is they are going to come for us because we make things, because we make beautiful things, because we have joy, because we train in virtue, and because they don't make stuff.
Yes.
All they do is attack and feel envious of the thing that they saw, and therefore it goes. I mean, it is the Reformation, but it goes back much earlier.
Nietzsche nails it with ressentiment, and the way he defines that, it's exactly the right dynamic.
Yeah, perhaps
Right,
a secular way to look at this is that quote about postmodernism is a form of nonsense promulgated by men who have nothing to say, not simply despite the fact that they have nothing to say, but precisely because they resent those who do.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the battle that we're in is always in the we want to tell stories. We want to train children to grow up and become virtuous knights and mothers, and we want to have fertility and craftsmanship. And I mean, I love Tolkien because this is his entire project, to show the way in which we participate in the creation. Tolkien and Lewis were fighting exactly the same battle in their lifetime. It goes back further. But it's an interesting sort of representation of who we are as human beings. There have always been makers, I think. The cavemen who were designing weapons and drawing on caves must have had their people that were coming along and distracting them.
History of the World Part 1. The critic goes and pisses on the cavern wall.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Specific to the American Liberal Progressive Project. Now I'm blanking on the name of the book, but there's a very good book on American sociology as a kind of evangelical project. The SJWs think they're doing a good thing, right? They think what they're doing, ironically, is championing the individual against this oppressive system. And what your description of it is, they think they have to fix the whole system in order to free the individuals. And we look at that, hopefully, and say, that's nuts. You know, what you're trying to train yourself against is the reality that we're created into, and the challenges that I would say God gives us in, you know, our leveling up, right, in our becoming fully human.
If you want to understand the mentality, read the 19th century Christian tract, The Imitation of Christ. That's the foundational tract for American progressivism.
So if we're seeing the common theme that we're seeing in a lot of these answers is a hostile reaction to the creative impulse.
Yes.
And a lot of you have spoken in your introductions about what sort of hostile reactions you've experienced to your creative impulses. So what have you done, and I'd kind of like to go down the row and have each person answer, to defend your creative space and to evade or resist this pressure so as to continue to be able to express your creativity, your desire to build, given this opposition?
So, the first answer is just fight back. I know in our case, we had two books that were due to come out at about the same time. One was by John Della Rose and one was by Declan Finn. Catholic Space Knights Fighting Demons and Catholic Detectives Fighting Demons. And they both got canceled on the same day by Amazon. We had a couple hundred pre-orders that just disappeared into the ether. The books were yanked, and we got them off, and we had to fight to get the books relisted again, and we never got the pre-orders back. Amazon, I actually believe them when they claim they have no way to do it, because side comment, the wonderful thing about Amazon is their back-end tech is about the very best that 1990s technology has to offer. But in our case, we didn't even have to go legal. We did make a few threats of it, but you have to fight back. They don't expect you to fight back. They don't expect you to do much. They expect you to just roll over and take it, because it's what's happened for decades. And if you fight back, the odds are on your side way more than you think they are. And one comment is, I know Hans is going to probably hit the other side of this later with what I'm about to say. They are terrified of going to court, the big corporations. They do not want to go to court. And the reason they don't want to go to court is because they don't want precedent set. As soon as one of us goes to court and wins, which we probably will if we ever have the resources to go to court, it sets precedent that is now going to mean that their business operations cannot operate the way they do, and it's going to cost them fortunes in money. So in many cases, all you have to do is actually stand up and fight, and they will eventually back down.
A very good example of this week is Apple lost the suit about in-app purchases.
Yes.
And now in-app purchases can be done outside of the Apple ecosystem.
And that's going to cost Apple
Billions.
tens of billions of dollars. They do not want precedents set this way, because once it happens, it changes their entire business model. I know Hans is going to have some good stories later about what happens when you do go to the legal fight and how that works. But that's the first instinct, is just fight. Their method of fighting is not to win the argument. Their method of fighting is to shut you down. Mm-hmm. And if you can just stand tall and not be shut down, you will probably win, is my first advice.
So mine is from the spiritual perspective. They're trying to destroy your morale, right? And so most of what I've been able to fight with, I haven't had to go to the legal, which is interesting, and nor the institutional, mainly because they don't really want a fight.
They don't.
Right. What they want to do is terrify you. So one thing is laugh at them, and that is,
They hate being laughed
They hate being laughed at, and that's why any of you bought Centrism Games and I signed at Rhesus at Bellum, which is Chesterton via Milo, which is laughter in war, right? That you must stay cheerful, because what they're trying to do is, blackpill you and get you to sit down and say, oh, there's nothing to do, oh, you're going to despair, oh, we can't fight them and stuff. And you say, if you're in the social media world, you tweet back like Rob has been doing and make fun of them and find ways in which you're just laughing at them. And most of my, most vocal enemies just faded away once I poked at them and said, not at you, but this is funny, isn't it? This isn't great. You tried to hit me and I hit back. The second thing is, I'd say we're warriors. We need our weapons, and our greatest weapon is knowledge, right? So in my Happy Warrior post on the blog, which I wrote way back at the beginning of all this, is first, they don't know anything. All they know is the rhetorical tactic of making you afraid, and the reason you feel afraid, I put to you, is because you actually care about making good arguments and knowing stuff. And so if someone's coming at you and attacking you and you're feeling threatened, maybe you guys aren't, maybe it's just the women I'm talking to, but one, you just say, well, I don't know yet. You go read some stuff, and the next time that happens, you're going to have the answer. And that's why, then there's other layers of, like, Vox put me on unauthorized TV, and that's great and stuff, but Vox also fights that way. Just has knowledge, right? He sat there and read for decades. This is our secret power, right? We're all readers. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And being able to, reading the juvenile books and training yourself in virtue through that virtual experience and so forth. Those are my two. You have to laugh at them, and you have to know that your greatest weapon is your willingness to learn.
The two most important words you can learn as an author or as a person who values their independence are fuck off. I'm not kidding. So
I said laugh at them.
Yeah, well, no, that's important too, but being able to tell them to fuck off and then to not care what they think. Because the entire program since the 19th century has operated upon targeting the innate sense of morality that is cultivated in all of us as a result of being in a moderately Christian civilization. The Eastern civilizations work on shame. You don't want to do things that embarrass the house, and the moral structure is built around that. Western civilization works on guilt. It's not shame-based, it's guilt-based. And what they've found a way to do since the 19th century is to weaponize shame to induce guilt. And by putting you on the back foot and feeling like you have to defend yourself morally, they've been able to get away with murder. Now, in one case, the abolitionists, it was a good cause. All of the cases since then, from Prohibition to the drug war, have proven to be at least a little bit misguided. But because of this strain of ideology, American politics and society runs on waves of moral panic. And the only appropriate way to deal with moral panic is moral circumspection, being willing to not respond to moralism until after you've aired out the issue, and then you apply your moral judgment. This is the basis of the Enlightenment tradition of open debate that arose because there was no longer an ex cathedra to appeal to, and because the wars to settle problems were getting tiresome. So, properly understood, I think, liberalism, small l, the values of free speech, open debate, and freedom of thought, are essentially a hedge against civil war, because they provide a common rule set by which to solve problems. So if someone's not willing to play by those rules, they don't get to play the game. They get told to fuck off. They get at the tail end of a lawsuit. They're the ones that get lined up against the wall because they're not playing by the rules we've all agreed on. As long as you let them weaponize your own moral sense and conscience against you, you're gonna lose. If you're willing to push them back for breaking the rules, and then afterwards think to yourself, did they have a point? You're gonna win every time.
The ability to not care is a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not kidding.
we fight this institutionally, probably on two fronts: politics and media. Makes sense. We're in Washington, relatively speaking. So politics, we are dealing on a regular basis with politicians fighting big tech behind the scenes. We've got some meetings coming up this week with several congressmen where we're trying to inform them and trying to motivate them so that they will defend all of us. From the media side, we defend all of you. We if you get censored, if somebody wants to reach out to me, we write about that. We promote it on social media. We promote it, on our websites. I go on radio and TV talking about it. Write op-eds. That's my full-time job. So, science fiction is just one part of it. I mean, for all that, that's why we're here. It's just one of the infinite number of verticals, sports and movies and TV. Every section of our lives has been segmented out and targeted. And science fiction, just like computer games, we're more on the front end of really the fight back, because I think by nature we're all anti-authoritarian, and that's why they got more pushback. Plus they got intelligent pushback, which is why you got the sad puppies and everything like that. But that's why they've got to target us more. And that's, if they see one area where they're getting decided amount of pushback, where there's an infrastructure that's being built where people can sell their books and reach out to people, which you all need to do, then they've got to squelch that, because otherwise they're gonna have that happen in other sections. And they're starting to see it. Sports is one of the areas where they're starting to see it, and that's a major area for them. So, when you all work together, you really need to work together. I got some thoughts on that we'll get to. Hans?
Well, what I want to do is share a little bit of my experience on how you can use the arbitration system, share some thoughts on the legal system, and finally I want to talk about what we can do as individuals, about picking up our own unique campaigns that can help, and how I'm doing that personally. So, as Russell mentioned, companies are deathly afraid of getting in court and having a judgment against them. Court is a place where people with minor harms, like they hurt you by taking your $10 fee and not paying you. Well, if you're fighting a $10 issue, it's not worth hiring a $1,000 lawyer to do that. So what they do is they force you into arbitration. If you read the terms of use on a lot of big tech companies, you don't have the right to take them to court if they do you wrong. And you don't have the right to do a group or class action against them. You have to take them to arbitration. Well, what has come out is if they manage to piss off enough of their customers, and if those customers are willing to pay a $200 fee to initiate an arbitration, then they can start the arbitration process, and at least under California law, where of course a lot of these big tech companies are located, they have to pay all the rest of the fees of arbitration. And no matter what happens or how it goes wrong, or if the decision is against you, you're not out a dime. So if you're willing to file an arbitration and go through filing the paperwork and go through just meeting the deadlines of filing a brief, I disagree because of this, and I saw their answer and I think it's wrong because of that. You can cost them tens of thousands of dollars unless they're willing to cave and agree to whatever your demands are. Now, that was done very successfully in a campaign with Indiegogo. There was a fundraiser for the Alt Hero Q comic, and after, very successful, about $100,000 fundraiser. After the campaign had ended, a couple days later, they decided they were canceling it and they were refunding everyone's money, and they were not going to give the comic artists the money associated with it. So it was clearly against the terms of use. The terms of use said that up until the campaign closes, yes, we can cancel it and we can refund your money, but after it closes it, we will pay the creator, and they had some terms and so forth. So it was an open and shut case. And I'm not at liberty to discuss how that arbitration ended up. However, if you buy Vox Day's book, Corporate Cancer, and if you look, I think it's chapter 9 or 10, there is a blank page that says, to be continued, I think it's October 12th, 2021. So in a few weeks, the story of how that ended up, and from what I've heard, it's a very good story, will be coming out. Now, the other incident is with Patreon. Patreon has made a habit of starting to deplatform people. And not for violations of the terms of use on their platform. They're policing people's off-platform speech and saying, oh, that tweet you gave out on Twitter, that was insensitive or racist, and that's not up to our community standards, we're yanking your account. A number of people fought them in arbitration. I know Milo Yiannopoulos did, and unfortunately lost. And Owen Benjamin decided to do that also. And a lot of his backers filed arbitrations. And then Patreon changed their terms of use in the middle of the dispute to specifically disallow the disputes that were then pending from being considered under arbitration. So that whole mess has been going on for a while. It is close to a conclusion, and again, I can't really talk about details, but I will say in my personal case, my arbitration against Patreon cost them something on the order of $45,000 to $50,000, and enough people doing that. That's you know how they say in Congress, a billion here, a billion there. You start to talk about real money. Patreon's rich, and they're not Congress rich. Tens of thousands of dollars here and there from hundreds of fans, it starts to impact their bottom line.
And for Patreon especially, their burn rate is already well in excess of their capital. So,
right.
And it also takes staff time, and staff time adds up too.
Right. So, because of all these successes in arbitration, and really those are drops in the bucket compared to what happened with DoorDash. DoorDash did wrong on a bunch of their drivers, and so their drivers all filed arbitrations. Thousands of those arbitrations, not just tens or hundreds. And DoorDash tried to take them to court to force them to do a class action in court, and the judge laughed at DoorDash, basically saying, you wrote the rules, you insisted that they had to follow these arbitration rules, you insisted each of these thousands of cases had to be arbitrated under an individual basis, you're following California law and paying up for each one of those. And because of this, a lot of big tech companies are, as scared as they are of court, they're getting more scared of arbitration because of these. And so Amazon recently changed their terms of use away from arbitration towards court. And progress is being made. There are laws that are currently going through the California legislature to address some of these abuses of the arbitration system. Now, if you look at the law, it's very fascinating because there is a legal obligation for good faith and fair dealing. And if you have a contract with someone, you are obligated to exercise that duty of good faith and fair dealing as you interpret and exercise the contract.
No matter how much you hate it.
Yes. Now, there are exceptions to that. People have tried to use that principle against, say, Google and YouTube for deplatforming them. And the ruling precedent in California is, I guess it's Song5 versus Google. And what they ruled is no, the duty of good faith doesn't apply because of the discretion that YouTube has. And when you have a discretionary case where you're allowed explicitly in the contract to exercise that discretion, you can't limit it by the principle of good faith and fair dealing. But if you look deeper into California law, the ruling precedent is only in cases where companies are explicitly implementing that kind of discretion. And yes, you can make an argument. YouTube is deciding what ads are placed on your video and what viewers your videos are placed in. Yes, there's a lot of discretion that they have there. Patreon, on the other hand, who gets the money? The patrons that their users decide. Patreon doesn't exercise that kind of arbitrary discretion as part of their business model, and I think they and a number of other tech companies, including Twitter, are very vulnerable to legal challenges on that issue if someone uses those cases and is able to find a court, hopefully outside of Santa Clara County, to push them.
Moreover, if they are also functioning as a fiduciary or another similar entity, they are guilty of a felony under federal crime called tortious interference, where you're interfering with the legally established contracts between two other parties. A middleman is not allowed to do that, even with discretion.
And let me add a footnote on the arbitration. In my opinion, we had them legally dead to rights, and the arbitrators in many of our cases just ignored the rules, even really obvious violations of the rules. In my case, my arbitrator had issued an order saying, don't submit other arbitrators' decisions because I don't want to be biased. Patreon ignored it and submitted a whole bunch of other arbitrators' decisions. I objected. I said, hey, they violated your order. And the final decision came out, no appeal, no mention of that violation or any of the sanctions that I had requested. So, it was really kind of eye-opening to see how the letter of the law is completely disregarded. So you have to be aware that just because the law and the rules are in your favor, they're not necessarily going to exercise them reasonably and fairly.
But I will say, though, and I was going to say this a bit ago based on some other things Hans and Dan have both said, I'm going to reiterate a comment I made in an earlier panel. Know the terms of service. Know the terms of service. If you listen to what Hans is talking about, almost everything that they're winning on is based on, we read your terms of service more carefully than you did, right? Learn them and know them. Throw them in their face. Force them to honor their own terms of service. You can win, you will not always win that way, but you can win a lot of victories just on knowing their terms of service and forcing them to comply.
And there are a couple of states' attorney general who are looking at that as a way of going after these tech companies, saying that they're violating the terms of service, which means that they're no longer protected by Section 230, which means that they are now vulnerable to violating consumer laws in those particular states. So even like, oh, we're protected, but no, you're not. You're not protected from committing crimes.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of case law on adhesion contracts that's about to be brought to bear in a couple of major cases as well.
Okay, so without going into too much
Right.
detail on this, because we have a couple of other topics to touch on. If people are getting down into these kind of details and disputes, do you have resources that they can reach out to you to help them?
Yeah, I certainly.
Okay.
If you get censored, I know when Rob sets this up, but you can get my email. My email is dgainor, Gainor, @mrc.org. A lot of you follow me on Twitter now, and I follow a lot of you on Twitter. You can reach out to me there. I'll try to help. Anyway. I mean, sometimes it's me placing a phone call with Facebook. I've gotten a lot of things fixed behind the scenes. Twitter is less cooperative. Google's somewhere in between. YouTube the same way. The battle's expanded from there. When we first started this, it was those four companies. Now, I mean, Ravelry banned pro-Trump people a few years ago. It's a global crocheting and knitting organization. The fight is absolutely, every fight's now TikTok. We're fighting with the communist Chinese, and they're not going to be real receptive.
Okay. So don't be shy about reaching out.
So I want to point.
If you want help with arbitration, EtherZar on Twitter, feel free to reach out to me. I've helped a lot of people with arbitrations. I can point you to resources that could be of use.
Okay, let's keep this brief.
All right, I want to step in the hornet's nest for just a second here, because my history in the religious right has taught me something. The religious right lost the culture war because they moved from being a big tent to a small tent. It started off, aside from the early days when it was explicitly a theonomist thing, starting in the 1980s, it was a big tent, general American values, supporting the family type of movement. And as they gained steam, the doctrine and the extra dogmatism came in. It became more and more explicitly not just Christian, but fundamentalist conservative Christian. And they lost. The same thing is happening now with the illiberal left. They started with the big tent of liberals, self-included. And as they're going through their purity spiral, they're kicking more and more of us out. When I came here, I was a little bit worried I'd be walking into a nest of just far-right folks who didn't want to see me. I'm very pleasantly surprised to see the amount of ideological diversity and careful thought on display in everybody here.
Okay, that leads nicely
Right,
into our next point.
okay, but the point is that movements like, as much as I would never get down on his right to do this, movements like Sad Puppies and Rabid Puppies, because they're direct tribal hitbacks, movements like that will shrink the tent. The movements like these guys are talking about, the broad tent general Americanism that James Lindsay talks about, those are the kinds of things that grow the tent and can allow us to sort out our differences, which means continuing the American conversation, not throwing people out into the cold, once these ideologues are out of power.
Okay,
To help us
you
get
queued
past
up
tense.
the next question
Oh,
quite
cool.
nicely. So we've spanned the gamut from Western philosophy and the history of the early Catholic Church to specific legal tactics that can be used today. But one thing I wanted to kind of take us back to is talking specifically about the modern era on a more global and cultural context. I think one thing that Rachel pointed out is that there is a perception that we are that we are outnumbered and outgunned, and this is not necessarily true. That they do not want to fight, they want to terrify. So my question, to kind of throw it open to the panel here, is what can we do today to remoralize people out there who are afraid to stand up, afraid to be singled out? How can we leverage those people who up to this time have been silent? How can we reach them and unite them and become organized in the same way that the anti-creativity, anti-Western civilization people are? You wanted to go first?
Rachel said it. You have to stand up and fight. And be willing to fight and be willing to let other people see you stand up and fight. And it comes down to a concept that Nicholas Taleb calls anti-fragility. You have to be able to withstand that. And some people aren't. You may be working for a company where if you face that kind of a public onslaught, you're liable to be fired. I like what Travis Corcoran has done in helping us become anti-fragile by his Escape the City book. Having that kind of independence and finding a way to make your way in life with as little dependence on the goodwill of other people as possible. That's a good idea. Diversify your income streams. If you're working for someone who might cancel you for wrongthink, try to pick up some side gigs. Try to find some second jobs. Maybe consider a different employer or a different career. Make yourself more anti-fragile. So I think it boils down to if you are already anti-fragile, take a risk, stand up, and let people see you being heard and fighting back. If you are not, take steps to become anti-fragile.
It's
I would
fun-
say,
Go ahead.
just have you roll down the
I was
line.
going to say, it's funny that you bring up that name, because I was going to mention
so was I.
Taleb as well.
Yep.
He has a term called the tyranny of the minority.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
And that's what is happening for the most part. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So what you have is, in large part, these is a small number of people. It is a minority, but they're very loud. They're very, very, very loud. And the loudness makes everybody, most people, not just not just these people who are attacking us, but most people are followers and cowards at heart. And if you stand up against the bullies who are cowards, they will back down because they are cowards. They know their numbers are weaker. And the majority of people who are more fearful, but either neutral or more on our side, but are afraid to stand up, when they see people with the strength and courage to stand up, it's much easier to get up behind somebody than it is to be the one up in the front lines. So standing up helps. And the last comment I'll make, and then I'll let Dan have it back, is don't be afraid to lead, even if you're not a natural leader. If you are leading somewhere that's worth going, people will follow you, even if you're a terrible leader. So pick a fight that makes sense. And the last thing is, what will inspire people to stand up behind you is win. If you win, people will get up behind you. So pick your fights and win.
Yeah. And so support people who stand up. I mean, I'm no Nicki Minaj fan. Lord knows. But when Nicki Minaj stands up and fights the power, you have to at least give her some acknowledgement. Maybe she'll back off. But right now she's talking about freedom to 23 million people on Twitter.
Yep.
That has more impact than anything I'll ever do. So yes, you have to support people like that. As the authors here, not to interfere with the people who are publishers, but as individual authors, you're going to be an indie author, you've got to figure out ways to capture your readers. That means if you do a book, include the front page of your book a way that you can get a spare short story connected to this book that you know you want. Because it's going to be really good backstory. You can read the book without it, but you really want it. All you got to do is sign up, email, send it to me so I can capture your name. And then you all need to compare lists and work together. So if you've got a list and you've got a list, then what you do, the standard newsletter thing is you share lists. You dedupe, which means you remove all the stuff that's where I've already got your people on the list, and you offer the person that you're working with half of your profits for that deal if somebody buys your book. So you make money off your list. They make money as well. You build your lists so that you can survive without. Because look, Amazon's going to go away. Andy Jassy took over Amazon. He's the asshole who shut down Parler. So they've already announced new policies. We're going to be more proactive going after content. They've already shut down a lot of content. We've written about it a bunch. They're going to get worse, not better.
Yeah. Keep your eye on porn, by the way, because what happens to porn happens to the rest of us 5 years later every time.
But to that point, when the big battle of trying to shut down porn right now, the idea of debanking porn, so we don't approve of your legal business. I don't like porn, but it's a legal business. So it's exactly Operation Choke Point, what they did with guns. Oh, we don't like guns, so we're no longer to allow your banking company, your gun company to bank with us. But if you buy a gun, we're going to take away your credit card, shut it down, tear it up, and lock up your money. A gal running for Senate in Delaware got debanked, had all of her money shut down, locked up in her bank for a couple weeks. So you got to build in a personal infrastructure of technology. Don't put all your money in one bank. Don't rely on any one bit of software. I interviewed Dr. Zev Zelenko, who's one of the people challenging the vaccine. They actually restricted his Google Docs. Think about that. Google Docs. Oh, sorry, you can't share with those people.
Never use Google Docs, by the way. They read everything.
Right. So I mean, whatever technology you use, and a lot of us, we've all made technology compromises. Every one of us has. Still, you've got to be prepared to lose that technology. Capture the names of your customers, the names of your readers, the names of your friends. You can wake up tomorrow and all of it's gone away.
On a more direct ideological warfare level, because of the minority rule, it's very important to remember that the vast majority of the people who might come after you, or who might challenge you, or might come after the people that you're a fan of, are convertible. The hardcore never will be, but the vast majority of them are joining the crusade, the moral panic of the day, because it's what's socially expected and it's what feels righteous. And the moral panic of the day, always almost, is built on the back of legitimate moral concerns and legitimate existential concerns. We're in the middle of the collapse of the Second American Empire. There will be a third, but we're in for a decade of really awful wrangling as we figure out how to reinvent ourselves again.
More than a decade.
Maybe. Certainly more than a decade before we reestablish the worldwide empire. But it's going to be tough. And in times like this, people are poor, they're locked out of the system. People who are suffering disadvantages get more disadvantaged. They've got a reason to fight. What you want to give them through your attitude, through your rhetoric, and through your willingness to treat them as human first and ideology second, is a reason to fight for your set of solutions, not the ones on offer from the people who are currently holding the keys to the kingdom that are oppressing them.
So I always end up with the spiritual battle.
That's good. It's
Which
good
is,
somebody's doing
no,
it.
which is also a huge part of it. It's like the minority thing is, I'd say I've been thinking about all of it while all of you were talking. The Big Tent is theirs problem too, right? It's like that there's
they're shrinking their tent now.
They're shrinking their tent now, and that one of the things that I do watch and that I'm grateful for the caution about whether we be sad puppies or not, right? Is don't get too wedded to our side in terms of, we have to be purists and you can only be a this and you can only be a that. I mean, Christians have been doing it for a while, and we play this game. And from the spiritual perspective, I grew up Presbyterian. I'm Catholic now. I will not fight you on whether or not the Pope is a good guy or a bad guy right now, right? Because
I don't have an informed opinion because
right.
I don't care.
But the thing is that right now, what's happening that I see particularly in the Christian conversation is everybody's fracturing over these doctrinal denominational debates that aren't in fact doctrinal debates, and I think that's the purity spiral that so that we end up with, I think yes, we do champion our leaders and you stick by the person that you stand up with and so forth, but it's very easy for our side to devolve into those sorts of sub-tribal fights.
It sounds like what you're saying here, and cut in on me if I'm interpreting this incorrectly, is that there's a real distinction between beliefs, which are what you think is true, and values, which are what you think is important. And the Big Tent is uniting on values rather than beliefs.
Yes.
Because we all have different beliefs. You're a devout Catholic, I'm an atheist, and we can argue about that, but we both have this shared value that when we have a disagreement, we use our words and we talk about ideas and we don't attack and try to harm each other personally.
Well,
and that's the shared value that we're fighting for.
Right, and that's what the SJWs don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right, and what you're saying.
Yeah,
about,
that's the value that they're trying to tear down.
You need to be the happy warrior, which is National Review's term, but they misused it. You need to be the Chestertonian happy warrior who other people can talk to, right? And I'd say, Devin, you asked us what should we be doing. You're already doing it. You're writing stories, right? You're giving people hope by these stories of courage and manliness.
Create value anywhere you can.
Right, and you keep doing that, and then you're available to talk to people. And and it also happens. Don't worry about the ring. Don't worry about getting the big power that takes over everything and flips it, right? Do it one-on-one in every single conversation you have. So I have to do it on all sides, on campus, constantly. One person comes up to me and says, you said that thing, I want to talk to you about it. And I have to go, what is this going to be? Is this going to be they're going to tell me I'm terrible? Is it going to be saying, I'm really on your side? You don't know, because they're not going to let on until you've made a few sort of comforting gestures to say, I want to talk to you, right? It's like we've been turned into cartoon characters battling each other rather than human beings who can actually have
Yes, because ultimately we don't want the One Ring.
Right.
We want to destroy it. We want to cast it into the fire.
And something Tolkien got exactly right is the only reason the ring got destroyed was that hobbits didn't want the power.
Right.
They just wanted the power not to exist to enslave them.
Now, I want to emphasize, you can think of this from a context of what's called fourth-generation warfare. There isn't a particular set of regimented tactics. You don't all have to go out and write a book that has positive values and market it and communicate it to people. There are other ways of fighting this, and what you have to do is look at your personal context and decide what is it that's within your, where is a weakness in the system? How do your strengths give you the ability to address those weaknesses and do something that can help you personally and your family, and help carry on the broader ideological fight, and help encourage other people to do their own, take their own measures.
And we all got to live in the real world, and that means you got to put food on the table and take care of your family. That's got to be first, and you've got to be understanding. So if you got to take a risk, maybe some of you, because of your circumstances, you take a smaller risk. Maybe you help other people take a bigger risk. That's you can do a lot of things anonymously in this world. There's organizations you can send money to and direct your money. There's ways of contributing anonymously. There's ways to help. Maybe you simply say, hey, I can't really fight, but I know this guy here could really help you. And you simply talk to this guy and get it going. You can be a connector. Don't be afraid to get a little bit involved, but if you're afraid, because you're a particular industry really, more than, I come from journalism, and journalism is mild compared to academia. If you're take too much of a risk, then figure out what you can get away with and get away with it.
I'm gonna push back on that. You've got to take a risk, right? There's don't try to be safe, right? And I think you're saying to
no, I'm saying
know the
people,
playing ground and don't make stupid risks.
Yeah, I'm saying you also got to protect your family. That's because
doing a little is better than doing nothing.
Get
right,
involved.
but the morale is important because their tactic is make you afraid and step back. Right? I'm going to be the fencer for the moment. It's like don't give ground. One, because there's a lot of reasons, but that you need to have the courage to make the action in the moment that it's right, and you'll never get a hit if you just stand around waiting for that opening.
All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men and good women to do nothing.
But
that's the
something I'll say to build on what Dan said, though, and not to disagree with what Rachel said, but there's somebody else probably said this before me, but I'll take credit because I never heard anybody else say it. There's a saying that I'm fond of myself, which is that changing the world is almost impossible, right? It's very hard. But changing somebody's world is remarkably easy. It is so easy that you probably have no idea how easy it is.
You just set me up for what I was wanting to say.
It is so easy to do.
Your universe.
And don't be afraid to do it, because the big changes come from the little changes.
Yeah.
And if you have the ability to do that for somebody, do it. And you will not regret it. You will find it is surprisingly easy, and you can go far. And one last thing before I give it back to Dan, I'm going to pimp Rachel and her profession for a second. Learn the history.
Boy, you really are.
Learn the history so much. I've listened to these guys talk, and I've just been like, yes, thank you. Because this stuff does go back way further than we know, and it's because they don't teach the history anymore. Nobody knows it. Their side doesn't know it. The normies don't know it. The people on our side don't know it. Learn the history and teach it. It is there, and all of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again.
Ideological programmatism is most appealing to people who have a strong sense of morality and a weak grounding in culture. You're not going to beat them by moralizing. But if you are able to create or impart or share culture, they will find their own way out. Maoism, Nazism, the Soviet Union, all built their movements on exactly the same ground, where the culture was dead, but the moral fervor lived on. And the moral fervor had to attach itself to something. So almost everybody here, one way or another, is firmly grounded in Western culture. All the different ideologies and religions that are here. If you can share the culture with your interlocutors, they will eventually find their way out, because they won't be grasping for meaning on the shallow level of ideological moralism.
Okay, that's a good note to end on, because we have a schedule constraint here. But ultimately, sort of an idea that is kind of emerging here is that ultimately the terrain in a certain way favors us, regardless of how dark it may look, because ultimately I think everyone would agree that their objective is to control us, to control our thoughts, to control our behavior. And all that means, and what that means is that all we need to do in order to win is not be controlled.
They want the ring.
They want the ring.
Yeah. I would like
I
to
paid
thank
attention.
all our panelists and turn it over to Rob here with some schedule news.